In Star Wars Legends, the era of the New Republic was sort of a return to the primeval age for Force wielders. Both the Jedi and Sith hit a hard reset, with only a handful of their kind existing. Luke's Jedi Academy, or Jedi Praxeum, consisted of only himself and a few dozen students, taking the galaxy back to its very early days. But it seems as though every few thousand years, a schism occurs in the Jedi Order which results in an antithetical sect of Dark Jedi. And unfortunately, Grandmaster Luke would be forced to experience this repeated Jedi pastime. A dark, twisted mirror of Luke Skywalker's own Jedi Academy would take form when one of his fallen students began his own school, a school that exclusively trained Dark Jedi. Greetings again, lore junkies, and welcome back to the archives. In today's holocron, we're going to be talking about the Shadow Academy, the evil Praxeum that bred Dark Jedi for the Empire. My friends, you can be assured that unlike the Shadow Academy, our archives have no sinister intention of brainwashing you to be an Imperial Jedi, but to battle against such misinformation, you must become knowledgeable of the deepest Legends lore. So if you enjoyed today's holocron, be sure to reach out and crush the subscribe button. It is your destiny. Now, let us begin. The antithesis of the Jedi Temple, the Shadow Academy, begins with a single man, a fallen student by the name of Brackiss. Though it is a debate whether he was really risen at all. Born on the planet of Mist, Brackiss was taken in by Imperial Inquisitors and was raised as nothing more than a tool for their sinister purpose. By the time he was a young man in the year 11 ABY, the remnant of the Empire discovered that Luke Skywalker was attempting to revive the Jedi Order on Yavin 4. In order to sabotage these efforts, the Inquisitors dispatched Brackiss as a spy in order to join Luke's academy and destroy it from the inside. However, the wise Grandmaster Luke instantly recognized Brakiss' true nature and loyalty, and discerned his intentions right out of the gate. But he was not willing to give up on the young man's destiny. Perceiving his strength in the Force, Luke decided to take him in as a student anyway, and devoted his time to turning him to the light side once and for all. By all accounts, he was successful, and Brackiss indeed integrated himself successfully with the other Jedi legitimately. He even helped them destroy the spirit of Exar Kun as a noble Jedi student. Over the next several years, Brackiss continued absorbing Luke's training, but in the year 14 ABY, Luke decided it was time to give him a test of character. Luke chose to take Brackiss through a dark side trial similar to the one that he had experienced on Dagobah with Yoda. This was a common test that Luke employed with students who struggled with their inner darkness. Rather than having them fear it, Luke would organize a trial to make them confront and ultimately overcome it. In his mind, this was the way that Luke attempted to make sure that there were no repeats of his own father, Anakin. It was the secret to making sure his students always knew how to combat the dark side rather than be seduced by it. Luke didn't want them ignorant of its temptations or vulnerable to its ways. Unfortunately, this wasn't always successful though, and in the case of Brackiss, it backfired on the Grandmaster dramatically. Brackiss was sent on an illusionary quest that would seem very real. It was designed to force Brackiss to look inside himself and to face his own nature. Skywalker hoped that the test would heal Brackiss and help him overcome his own inner dark side, leading him to accepting that being a Jedi was a greater calling than a life as an Imperial agent. But Brackiss found only his self-deception, and the fact that the Empire could force him to do great evil, even against his own nature. Faced with the evil inside of his own heart, Brackiss attempted to escape, to turn away, to hide from the reality that was his own soul. However, Luke forced Brackiss to delve even deeper into his own nature, facing the lies of his very existence as a Jedi. The ordeal nearly broke Brackiss' mind. Unprepared to confront what he truly was, he failed the test and instead found that it had broken something deep within him. Brackiss emerged from the illusion terrified and enraged. Blaming Luke for breaking him, he fled to his ship and left the Jedi Academy. Luke mourned the loss of his pupil with such high potential, but he knew that he could not force Brackiss to stay and be a Jedi. But letting him go turned out to be a massive mistake. Many years would pass, and Brackiss would return in the year 23 ABY, working for the Second Imperium. The Second Imperium was one of the final sects of the Imperial Remnant, and possibly one of its most powerful. The Second Imperium had a mysterious leader that claimed to be Palpatine resurrected yet again, though it was later revealed that this was actually an imposter. Palpatine was long dead, with his final clone body having died in the year 10 ABY on the world of Onderon. This new leader, however, believed that the Second Imperium needed its own Imperial Jedi in order to unite the remaining warlords and to defeat the New Republic. Brackiss was the one chosen by the Palpatine imposter to create the Anti-Academy in order to undermine and destroy Luke Skywalker's Jedi Order. And so, Therefore was born the Shadow Academy. Brackiss would begin finding Force-sensitive recruits on worlds such as Dathomir, where he allied with what remained of the Night Sisters. His circle of evil leadership included Tamith Kai, Vonda Ra, and Garowin. Tamith Kai would be his second in command, and one of his chief instructors of the other Dark Jedi cadets. The base of this school would be an orbital battle station. Its appearance was reminiscent of the Trade Federation dreadnoughts, but instead of a sphere in the center, there was a large castle-like structure. It was ringed with defensive turbolasers and engines for hyperspace travel. But most importantly, the system was equipped with a cloaking device in order to make it completely undetectable, allowing the Academy to operate in total secrecy. Now, unbeknownst to Brackiss, the Shadow Academy battle station had another feature as well. The faux Emperor had rigged it with thousands of explosive charges that could be activated remotely. This was a safeguard that the leader had instilled just in case Brackiss and the Dark Jedi ever betrayed their creator. This fake Palpatine may not be the real deal, but this was certainly a stroke of sinister genius worthy of the original. Recruitment, however, would prove to be a challenge, as even Luke himself had difficulty locating Force sensitives in the galaxy. But the Shadow Academy used much different methods of acquiring their cadets. Beginning on Dathomir, the witches gathered a sufficient amount of Force-sensitive youths that they were already aware of. Then they scoured all of those already within the Second Imperium's army. Brackiss had stolen a Jedi detection device from Luke, which was a technological piece of equipment that could read Force signatures within another being. It was one of the methods the Empire used to locate hiding Jedi in public back in the day. Using the device, he would screen through all of the conscripts and trainees that were pulled from the Empire's ranks. And finally, Brackiss dispatched agents into the galaxy to locate potential Force sensitives on the fringes of society. They went to places in the underworld such as Coruscant, where they could locate exceptional children on the street, those that had already been cast out of society, and took them and trained them as Dark Jedi. This method was particularly cunning, as it was something that the Sith did long ago. It was important to find those strong in the Force that had already been wounded in life. The way the Master could prey on those existing dark side feelings in order to make them more powerful. And one of the strongest members of the Shadow Academy came from this very origin, but we'll get to him in a moment. Once the trainees are selected, they would begin their training. Just like in Luke Skywalker's Praxeum, living conditions were a main contributor to the training itself. Tamith Kai enforced harsh discipline on the initiates. She believed that adversity and deprivation were necessary to hone a student's power. Under her direction, students lived in Spartan-like conditions. They were each given barren cubicle chambers for sleeping and for meditation. These rooms were dim and had no comforts whatsoever. The trainees were expected to meditate, to practice assignments, and build their Force abilities in solitude. Tamith Kai, who was a more experienced wielder of the dark side, knew that hardship was what bred strong Darksiders. The solitude was so that each Dark Jedi could learn to rely on themselves and their own inner power. They'd develop alone so that they would not become a liability to someone else, or learn to rely on others, forming strong attachments. But for those that still required some convincing to embrace the dark side, a torture chamber awaited them. The unwitting initiate would be forced into what would first appear to be an empty room, but then they would be assaulted with strobing lights and extreme temperature alterations. After this, they would be blasted with jets of near freezing water, all to bring them to their physical and their psychological limit. Once all of that was complete, the final phase would take place to complete their dark side conversion. A hatch in the ceiling would drop a heavy sonic generator into the room, one that released an agonizingly loud shriek. The instructor overseeing the torture would taunt and encourage the victim that the only way to stop the scream was to use the dark side to save themselves. This was a very efficient and a streamlined way of turning those recruits or deepening their existing connection to the darkness. The only time these trainees really had social interaction with one another was during lectures or during brutal training exercises. Dozens of students would attend Brackiss's lectures in a meeting room, where he taught the philosophy of glorified power and conflict. He would also project holographic images of cataclysms, such as exploding stars or other violent events. Himself and his students were taught to meditate on these destructive images to strengthen their resolve in the dark side. Training drills involved chambers full of various technological exercises which were often life-threatening. One such chamber generated holographic enemies which simulated dueling opponents or blaster-wielding remotes. This would test their lightsaber skills in both weapon combat and blaster deflection. Another chamber they had saw a group of blindfolded students being armed with only wooden sticks. They were then made to deflect objects automatically launched at them with increasing lethality. It began with balls, then rocks, and eventually knives. At least 6 students died during this specific exercise during the Academy's operation. Once they proved themselves worthy, the trainees were gifted a red lightsaber. Rather than constructing it themselves, the lightsabers were mass-produced and handed out once they attained enough skill to wield one. There was not a lot of ceremony or importance placed upon lightsabers at all in this academy, which is in strict contrast to Luke's. They were tools and weapons. They were not viewed as companions or symbols like the Jedi and the Sith view them. Now we move on to the ultimate plan for the academy. The Academy's major objective was to weaken Luke Skywalker's ranks while simultaneously bolstering their own. In order to do this, they boldly kidnapped several Padawans from Luke's order on Yavin 4, including the twins of Leia, Jacen and Jaina Solo. However, the twins showed impressive restraint to torture and indoctrination. They eventually were able to escape with the help of Luke and his student Tenel Kadjo. This great failure ultimately exposed the Shadow Academy's existence to the New Republic, forcing Brackiss to change his tactic. He relocated the Shadow Academy near Coruscant to prey on the New Republic's supply lines, and to quietly recruit more followers. They looked around for Force wielders among the poor youth and the street gangs. This was when he recruited a young boy by the name of Zekk, who had once been a friend of Jacen and Jaina. He had not shown enough Force sensitivity to be brought to Luke's academy though, but Brackiss could sense his latent power. Brackiss trained Zekk to be the champion of the Shadow Academy, calling him the Darkest Knight. As a final test, he faced the apprentice of Tamitha Kai in single combat. The contest would decide who would become the leader of the Dark Jedi. Zekk executed the Academy's best student and ultimately became their Dark Leader. Under Zekk's command, the Second Imperium launched a raid on a major computer research center on the world of Kashyyyk. During the assault, Zekk was confronted by his old friend, Jaina Solo. Ultimately, he was unable to bring himself to kill her, and decided to honor their friendship for old time's sake. Doing her one last favor, he warned her that the Jedi Praxeum on Yavin 4 was the Second Imperium's next target. With this warning being taken seriously, Luke and his Jedi prepared themselves for the climactic assault that the Shadow Academy would enact on the Praxeum. The Second Imperium committed all of its forces into the attack of Yavin, just as Zekk had promised to Jaina. The Shadow Academy and an Imperial fleet established a blockade around the moon, while Dark Jedi and stormtroopers invaded the surface. Luckily, Admiral Akbar and the New Republic arrived in order to engage the Imperium's fleet, while the Jedi repelled the siege below. Tenel Kadjo, however, was also a former Night Sister, who was able to kill the Dark Jedi Tamitha Kai in a climactic duel, therefore ridding the Academy of one of its chief operators. Meanwhile, Luke took on Brackiss, and it goes without saying that he was ultimately successful. But Luke only disarmed him, having compassion on his former student, and spared his life. His loss was such a humiliation that Brackiss fled with his tail tucked as their assault began to crumble. Brackiss ran to the chambers of the quote-unquote Emperor in order to ask for guidance. But what he found was the truth of the charade. Their leader was nothing more than a lifelike hologram being operated by 4 of the last remaining royal guards. But in order to keep their dark secret from getting out, they activated the Shadow Academy's self-destruct mechanism. Without a countdown, the station exploded out of the sky above Yavin, ending the lives of Brackiss, the guardsmen, and all of the remaining Dark Jedi. And with it, that is the end of the Shadow Academy. Not long after this, the entire Second Imperium and its movement would implode as well. In the aftermath, the Dark Jedi surrendered and were taken prisoner. Many of them, such as Zekk, renounced the dark side and were later integrated into Luke's Jedi Academy for an ultimate chance at redemption. However, several others were too far gone. 2 specific students, Lomi Plo and Welk, would go on to join Darth Krayt's One Sith Order. And so, my friends, this was the origin and the structure, as well as the story of the Dark Jedi anti-academy that attempted to destroy Luke's. I think it's thematically appropriate that Grandmaster Luke got to deal with his own version of the Great Schism. However, he got to mend the mistakes of the Jedi of the past. Luke did not let the Shadow Academy turn into something serious like the Legions of Leto or the Sith Order, fixing the mistakes from the first and the second Great Schism. Rather, Luke dealt with the situation with patience, courage, and most importantly, compassion. It may seem like weakness that he spared his old apprentice, and even gave the Dark Jedi a chance at rehabilitation, but Luke showed that his Jedi were supposed to be different. Luke believed that the dark side was not a permanent, predestined path, but they all deserved a chance at redemption. Not to mention most of these trainees were forcibly turned to the dark side and warped by the Dark Academy. A little kindness went a long way for those former dark side apprentices. But what do you think about the story? This was the abbreviated version of the events told in the later Young Jedi Knights novels, as well as the New Jedi Order novels. If you want to hear more stories from this era in time, be sure to let us know down in the comments down below, as I know that some aren't quite familiar with what's going on in the NJO series in this timeline. So would you like to see more adventures from Luke Skywalker, his students, and his Jedi Praxeum? But until next time, my friends, may the Force be with you wherever your path takes you next, and have a great day.